Hello friends! I'm gonna be ranking the last 15 books I read, starting with some rapid fire of books that I gave up on pretty quickly. Starting with Lord of Light. And I gave up on this one because it was incredibly wordy while also not actually explaining what was happening in a scene. Like honestly, I consider it to be an utter failure of both exposition and writing style. I gave it 1 star. And at number 14 goes to On the Edge. I gave up on this one because it was jumping point of view characters way too quickly. It just kept throwing in new ones as it wanted to show us new things and like threw the character development focus out the window in the process. I gave it 2 stars. Then book 13 goes to This Cursed Light. And I gave up on this one because it was just not as good as the sequel. The sequel, very nice. Earned angst and romantic drama. This one was just like cheap banter and melodrama all the way home. No romantic tension to be seen in this fantasy romance. I gave it 2 stars. Okay, now that we've got the dishonorable mentions out of the way, let's go to book 12, which I read over half of before giving up. This is a book in the 1600s on the high seas. We have a famous detective on board and some mysterious threats in the form of beggars on fire having been made to the ship. But alas, the detective has been accused of various crimes, so he's locked up in the ship's brig and he cannot investigate this. Who comes in to investigate instead is his bodyguard slash assistant and the wife of one of the dignitaries on the boat, who's also pretty invested in the boat like not being sunk by this person who's threatening the boat. So first up, you think that from this premise, it sounds like people are like investigating threats and that it's gonna be exciting and you're gonna get real detective-iness and clues and all that kind of stuff. Alas, no. It's just kind of like going around the ship and asking people like, do you have a clue for me? And then they say no. And then our next narrator goes to them and is like, do you have a clue for me? Okay, no. And like, I got over half into this book and it felt like no progress had been made on this mystery. Instead of feeling like a detective story where we're slowly putting together clues, it felt just like a continuous exposition dump with a bunch of repetitive scenes strung together. Additionally, this book has a lot of like teasing of, is this actually a supernatural threat? Which in some ways is intriguing, but also they didn't go hardcore enough into it. And though it sometimes did feel supernatural, it didn't exactly feel like a threat. So I gave The Devil in the Dark Water 2 stars, and if you want to hear more of my thoughts about it, I have it in a reading vlog, which I will link in the footnotes. The book ranked number 11 is Cocktails and Chloroform. So this is book 2.5 of a series that I have been enjoying, which is about a modern day detective woman who gets accidentally body swapped, time traveled to Victorian era Scotland, where she becomes the maid of an undertaker who also consults with the police. And she gets to help out with solving murder mysteries that way. So you might be wondering, Chloe, if you loved this enough to get to book 2.5, why is this ranked so low? And cause like, it was bad. So this author does one of my pet peeves, which is just like too much recap of previous books. This one was a novella, and I swear, half the page length was dedicated to recap. Either recapping what happened in book 1 and book 2 to an excessive degree, and recapping the historical context. You can tell the author is a big history nut. She has like a bibliography at the end of her books, but the book is constantly like, okay, time to do some action and catch a murderer, woo! And then like pausing, pivoting, and being like, so this is why the slums were like this in Victorian England and how people lived and how it came to be and how things metamorphosized into modern day and like, and then we'd encounter like a character and it'd be like, remember this character from book 1 and 2? Here's the things that they did in book 1 and 2 and here's who they are and here's the relationship with the protagonist. Okay, now we can resume the story. And by the time we got through all of these info dumps, the story was only like half the page length of this novella, which was just not enough. And honestly, I don't think I'm going to continue on the series from here because that is something that also bothered me quite a lot in book 1 and book 2, and it seems to only be accelerating as we get more backstory that we can info dump. I gave Cocktails and Chloroform 2 stars. Rank 10 is a Fragile Enchantment. And when I say this was a disappointment, this was a disappointment. Because I had given this author 5 stars before. So this is what this book is trying to do, and then I'll tell you how successfully it did it. This takes place in a magical world of Regency-era England, where we have a girl from magical Ireland who is a magic seamstress, and her dresses are what's hot in the season right now, and so she gets hired to make the outfits for a royal wedding. So she goes to London, and she encounters the engaged couple, who is an English prince and a Spanish princess who is like not so secretly a lesbian. And surprise, surprise, she has great chemistry with the prince. And they start falling in love, and also there's like a gossip column on the side, and also there's an annoying plot. So like the first thing that drove me insane about this book is that it's placed here in Regency England. And I have loved these romances before because of the vibes of the culture and the setting, because people are like, cannot come out and do audacious flirting all the time, so they're kind of roundabout about it. And that provides really interesting tension as people cannot just come out and speak their feelings, and you have to really read between the lines. And also there's like grand balls happening, right? This book delivered on absolutely none of that. Because while this has the vague trimmings of that setting, it commits to literally none of it. Like the prim and proper manners of this society are only brought up so characters can be like, no, we're not gonna do that. We're all friends here, right? Person I met 3 minutes ago? Yeah, we're all friends. Who cares? I'm just gonna call everyone by their first name. And characters were left and right, like saying things like, yeah, and slang, and like the author had like zero dedication to actually making her fantasy version of Regency England feel like the Regency period. And also fun balls, you wish, because the balls are populated by political protests, because there's an uprising in the city of Irish immigrant workers, and they are protesting because they're being treated bad. Fine, but the problem is that this political plotline that kept getting brought up, like the protests are happening, and of course people are associating our heroine with it because she's Irish and all of this stuff, like it never actually becomes relevant to the love plot or anything else that's going on. So we have everything else that's going on, and then like the Irish political protest, and it never actually connects. And also our protagonist doesn't really have like strong feelings on the matter either. And the final straw is that I felt like our lovely couple had no chemistry. The prince was sad, neglected boy, and the seamstress was like, I'm so quirky, I'm always losing my scissors. I didn't get it, I didn't see the love. The vibes were off, and the plot was messy and kind of incoherent. So I gave A Fragile Enchantment 2 stars. Then in rank 9, we have The Fates Divide. This is book 2 of a series. In book 1, we start with this politically messy planet where the ruling family has come in and taken over this planet, and the princess has this magical power where she causes pain in anyone that she touches. So then she cannot get close to anyone. And then we have someone else living on the planet, part of the oppressed group of people, and he has the magic power. Then whoever he touches, he turns off their power. So they come into each other's orbit, and a romance ensues. And I read book 1 years ago and I loved it, so I decided to pick up book 2. And it was really missing some nice romantic spark there. And I suppose this is just one of the traps of sequels to romance books that the earlier book, This Cursed Light, also fell into. That like once your couple's together by the end of book 1, in book 2, in order to create tension in their relationship, it's just like throwing random drama at them, and it doesn't really feel like real or earned. And that was this one. But then intermixed with all of this relationship drama scenes, which sometimes were quite good and did pull at my heartstrings, only sometimes, there was a lot of really boring, complex political machinations. There's like a rebellion brewing on the planet going against the royal family, and our princess isn't quite sure what side she wants to be on. And also our gang is traveling around the galaxy, both fleeing from their enemies and trying to find allies. Anyway, but those parts were very boring. And this book just didn't have enough plot engine to make it exciting or relationship development to keep me invested in that. So 2 stars. Then we come to rank 8, The Naturals. I'm kind of surprised that this made it so high, but we did have quite a few duds. The Naturals is about a group of teenagers with awesome abilities to like profile criminals and to tell when they're lying. So then they're like recruited by the FBI to help work on various cases with serial killers. And like, I think the sticking point for me in all of this was the teenagers part was very teenager cringy. I can really love young adult books. I do not love the version of young adult books where it's just like throwing love triangles at me without developing either leg of the actual relationship development of the love triangle. I also felt like the fundamental premise of this book, that these teenagers are incredibly talented at this detective work profiling business, was highly underutilized. Where it told me that our protagonist was super good at profiling people, but she was never really successfully able to profile like her fellow characters, or even like finding the murderer before the plot twist happened. So in the end, it felt like mediocre teenagers having love triangles, and also, surprise, there's serial killers. I gave it 3 stars. It was entertaining enough to read it all, but I do not think I will bother continuing with the series. Then rank 7, we have The Blighted Stars and its sequel, The Fractured Dark. So this is a sci-fi book about this mega corporation that goes out and mines rare minerals from planets. And we are following Tarquin, kind of the prince of this mega corporation, who's really into geology and mining. He loves it. So he's going out on this expedition to a new planet. Here is the catch. There's an eco-terrorist group that is very against their mining practices because they say that it's destroying the natural ecosystems of these planets. Is it actually? Jury's still out, but maybe that's just because the mega corporation is paying the jury. So we are also following the perspective of one of those eco-terrorists named Naira, who has also come to the planet in disguise to shut down the operation. And one of the very cool sci-fi world building things is they have perfected 3D printing people. And this has kind of changed their culture and how they think about bodies and minds, because you can always just kind of like print yourself a new body and have your mind uploaded into it. And it's like no big deal if your body's destroyed as long as you like semi-recently backed up your mind to the cloud, you know? But on this far off world that they're just starting to land on, there is no cloud to back up with. So stakes are raised somewhat. And this also means that our eco-terrorist woman can very easily be in disguise because she just inserts her mind into the bodyguard's print. And then they crash land on the planet and find some really weird, kind of horrific things happening there. And in the process, they find that they actually make a pretty good team and they don't hate each other as much as they expected to. So the things that I didn't love about these books is, especially the second book gets very repetitive. It's just kind of the same scenes happening over and over, and the book gets very long very fast. And a lot of those scenes were the characters questioning whether their decisions were really their own, because there's a lot of like emotional and mental manipulation going on in these books. So it felt like every single decision the characters were second guessing it, because like, oh no, but what if I'm being manipulated? And I'm like, move on and make a decision already. But like, I did enjoy the characters and the world building is 80% solid. There's a few nitpicks that do bother me about the inconsistencies in it, but I do love how it explored the idea of 3D printed bodies. And if that sounds like something you're interested in, I would recommend at least book 1, which I gave 3 stars. I gave book 2 2 stars. Rank 6 is Uncanny Vows. This is an urban fantasy taking place in the early 1900s where we have a brother-sister duo who are monster hunters. And they are called to a new city to hunt down a new monster. And there's also an undercurrent of they're in trouble with their monster hunter bosses and they're trying to walk a fine line to make sure that they don't have any more infractions. And this, similar to the Blighted Stars books, has a lot of really repetitive scenes that I felt like really didn't serve much the plot. Additionally, I felt like this book was lacking consequences. The characters are flawed and interesting, but then their flaws never actually get them into any trouble. Or there's this big threat from their bosses, but then it never really pans out and whatever. It felt very much steeped in middle book syndrome, where the first book set up a bunch of interesting character arcs and flaws and issues with them, and then this book didn't actually develop any of that. But the world was fun, and it did, in fact, very much commit to the vibes. I gave Uncanny Vows 3 stars. And now we move from books that I liked but had some nitpicks with to books that I loved. Starting out with rank 5 being Half a Soul and its sequel, 10,000 Stitches. And this was the book that I read just before A Fragile Enchantment, where I was complaining about all the lack of Regency era vibes. So this is also fantasy version of Regency era England romance. And it nails the Regency era vibes. We have suitors a coming calling. We have the dangers of dancing with someone more than 2 times at a ball. We have manners, we have the season, we have the proper vocabulary for the era, and we also have magic on top of everything. Half a Soul was utterly fantastic. It is about a woman who had half of her soul stolen by a fairy, and this has messed with her emotions somewhat so she cannot feel embarrassment. A big problem because she's accidentally creating scandals, which is hurting the marriage prospects of her cousin and also herself, but like, who cares about her, right? And then she meets the court sorcerer, who is a very rude man, but then she can't get offended either, so she's like the only woman that he doesn't drive away, and he gets even more intrigued with her as he discovers the business with her soul and decides that he wants to help and investigate, because this is an interesting magical puzzle. And then as they start spending more time together, they get to know each other better and start falling in love. It was incredibly cute and beautiful and fun, and this author's writing is so bingeable, easy to read. I would 100% widely recommend like everything that this author has written, because she just nails that like compulsive, like I need to read the end of this love story every time, while also nailing the setting and the tone. They're utterly delightful. 10,000 Stitches, the sequel, is like kind of a Cinderella retelling where we have this maid to a manor house and she falls in love with this lord that comes visiting, but then she can't flirt with him or even talk with him because she's just the help. And then a fairy gets wind of her plight and kind of becomes a fairy godmother, but it's definitely like the don't make bargains with the fae kind of fairy, because his help isn't actually all that helpful. And then as he is helping her get this guy, they start getting to know each other and start falling in love. Ugh, I love these books. 4 stars. Then rank 4, we get up to a book that I liked even better than these, but I don't know if I'd so widely recommend it, which is I Am Not a Serial Killer. This was a reread for me for Halloween, and I read it for a reading blog, which I'll link down in the footnotes for you. This follows a teenager who is a sociopath, and he has a lot of the tics and urges of serial killers. So he thinks he's probably going to become a serial killer one day, but he doesn't want to. So kind of his manifesto and goal in life is to not become a serial killer, but he's also still obsessed with them because he's learning everything he can about serial killers in order to not become one, right? This will totally work out. So he's stuck in that precarious balance. And then a serial killer comes to his town and starts upsetting his precarious mental health balance, because our protagonist, he wants to track down the serial killer and take him down, but also letting himself stalk someone and hunt them down, even if they are a serial killer, probably isn't good for his precarious mental health balance. But because he's entirely obsessed with serial killers, he can't leave this puzzle alone. And this book executes that idea like flawlessly. The internal conflict of this book is like perfection. One of the things that I love most about this book is the relationship between our protagonist, teenage boy, and the serial killer in town. Though they don't have all that many scenes together, they're constantly being compared and contrasted and bouncing off each other. Sometimes the book is unsettling in its horror and thriller elements, but in the end, I still gave it 5 stars. Can you believe it? 4th on the list and we're already at the 5 stars. That's a lot of 5 stars in this month of reading, and I am so excited about that. Next up, rank 3, we have the Soulmate Equation. This is a contemporary romance novel. There's this company where you can send in your DNA and then they will match you with people with romantically compatible to yours. And the company is in its beta stages and it's about to launch to the world when their CEO matches incredibly highly with someone who is our protagonist, Jess. And she doesn't really want a relationship right now, but she gets convinced into trying it out by the company who offers her a lot of money because they really want to be able to prove to their shareholders and the media that their thing works and they can produce good relationships. And what better publicity than your CEO himself getting matched and falling in love. And one of the things that impressed me a lot about this book is that following in the tropes of sci-fi books, it really takes its premise here so that you could be matched romantically with people based on your DNA and like really runs with it and explores a bunch of different facets of it and how that affects people. Because like if you get a high match with someone, that's a lot of pressure at the beginning of a relationship that like this might be your soulmate according to science. But also there's another layer of pressure to their budding relationship where a lot of the things that they're doing is for the Instagram posts, for the articles written about them. And they're constantly questioning like how much of our chemistry and connection is real and how much of it is we're both faking for the cameras here in that juicy fake datingness. This book is also incredibly full of heart. Our protagonist is a single mom and a lot of her priority is taking care of her daughter, and there's a lot of relationship building both between her and her love interest and her daughter and her love interest. And both of our characters are very science-minded and focused, and I loved all the conversations in here about the science and the data and what that means to both of them. I felt like this both really succeeded as a book exploring an interesting concept and a romance. I gave it 5 stars. Then, rank 2, we have Paladin of Souls. The protagonist of this book is a 40-something-year-old woman, and she's the retired dowager queen. Her daughter has just taken the throne, and she is being shuffled off by her attendants like, oh, go knit in the corner there. We don't need you anymore. And she is having kind of a midlife crisis in this moment, and feels like she needs to get out and do something. So she decides to go on a religious pilgrimage. Mostly the religion part is just an excuse to go out and be on the road for a while. Because in a lot of ways, her character starts out this book being pretty anti-religion because she's had experiences with the gods of this fantasy world in the past, and it was like never a positive experience. She was given impossible tasks by them that led to her friends dying, and she feels like she's never really received help from any of the gods. So she doesn't really want any part of them, but as she's on this religious quest, it turns out that the gods are not quite done with her and would like to give her some more impossible tasks to complete. And I love the character arc of this book, where she starts out very jaded, not wanting to have any duties, not wanting to do anything, and then as she gets tangled with different political factions and magical and spiritual things on her journey, she starts accepting her role as someone who has a lot of power, both politically and, if she wants it, magic religiously, and figuring out how much of that she wants to let in her life and coming to terms with all of that. This book also had an interesting, fun romance and some plot twists that I really gasped and loved. It's a soft book about picking yourself back up after tragedy and major life upsets. I will say it's slow-paced, and it's kind of a sequel to another book where our protagonist of this one was a side character of that one. I felt like all the parts of this book, from the slow-paced to the awesome character arc, really combined to have the perfect, comforting, soft feeling, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. And I read this book with my book club. We discuss the books on Discord, and it's only a few dollars a month to join if you want to come discuss them with us. This is the book we are reading next. And honestly, Paladin of Souls was like the most controversial pick for the book club yet, because me and some other people gave it 5 stars, and some other ones gave it 1 star. So it's not for everyone, but it was definitely for me. Then rank number 1, the best book of these 15, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries. When I first heard about this book, I saw the word encyclopedia in the title, and I heard people pitching it as like a slow, quaint, cozy, has a little bit of romance, but not really, and I was like, okay, that sounds boring, no. But then after like Paladin of Souls, I was in the mood for something that was a little bit slower and cozier, because I really liked that one. So I picked this one up, and well, you can tell how that went. This is about Professor Emily Wilde, and she studies fairies. And she's going on a research expedition to research a particularly dangerous and elusive type of fae. And so much of this book, I feel like, is about the passion of scholarship and her work, where this is like the last species of fairy that she wants to put in her encyclopedia that she's been writing for years. Her life is this scholarship. It's where she feels at home. Emily is very like autistic coded. She doesn't always understand social cues. She finds it hard to make new friends, and she doesn't always find comfort in other people's company. What she is really good at is studying fairies. Top of her class, top of her field. She's got her trip planned out, but what she does not plan out or expect is that her colleague, Professor Wendell Bamblebee, decides to tag along on the expedition. And she doesn't want him there, but she grudgingly says yes because he's super charismatic and good at getting funding and invites to events, which she needs. So if they write a paper together, it'll boost her career. And throughout the book, there's a little romance between them, but the book is told through the journal entries of Emily, and she's so focused on her research and the plot of finding the fairies and interacting with them that the romance doesn't feature that much in her journal, and it definitely becomes secondary and just little snippets, and you get to read between the lines and see the flirting, which I love. The plot is a little meandering, but the heart of it, of Emily coming outside of her comfort zone as she travels to a new place and meets new people and finds fae that are maybe a little bit above her skill level to deal with. It's incredibly well done, woven together, and entertaining, and it brought me so much joy and was incredibly bingeable. I highly recommend the audiobook. The voices are fantastic. It really helps the flow of the journal entry framework of this book. I gave Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Faeries 5 stars, and I am very, very excited to read the sequel. I put that on my most anticipated books of 2024 list, which you can find in the footnotes. And if you liked watching this video where those were the last 15 books that I read, I think you'll enjoy watching this one next.